Hello again, welcome back, welcome to our latest Regcast. Today we're talking about guaranteeing cloud service levels. Well, you've seen all the hype about the cloud, but are you actually going to get what you think you're getting? So, helping us to talk about this today, welcome back to the studio from Riverbed, Mark Lewis, welcome.
Hello Tim, it's great to be here again.
Good. Mark, you were telling us while we were in the other room about your band. Are there any gigs you'd like to publicise or anything like that? You got a free hit now, just when people are interested.
Fantastic. Yes, well, we'll be playing next Thursday, and I have Bill Legend of said T-Rex performing with me on percussion. So it's at the Royal Oak in Yateley if anyone would like to come along.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
If you don't know who T-Rex were, then then that makes us feel very old. And so on backing vocals today, it is welcome back to the Dark Lord, Dr. Stats himself, Tony Locke.
Thank you, Tim. I have been banned by the EU from doing backing vocals, or indeed any vocals that involve notes.
Well, we won't be singing today, and that's good. And my name's Tim Phillips, and I'm the drummer. Now, there's a bit of an X-Factor theme to this whole thing, actually, today, because we've got an extra tab for you. So along with the questions, please ask questions. Sure, you'll have a lot. If you ask them to me, then I'll ask them to them. Then there is a little tab that you'll see which says Votes. Please do that. It's a little 5-question survey. Get on with it quick. You don't want to miss very much. 5 simple questions. We'll try and use your votes. You know, we'll bring them out when we're doing this, the Regcast. Gives us a little bit of information about what you're thinking at the moment, where you are with the cloud. Also, there's feedback, and you can download the presentation. You know this stuff, so let's get on with it, really. Tony, why are we discussing this today?
A number of reasons. Chief amongst them is there's been a lot of discussion, as you said in the beginning, about cloud. People are talking about internal clouds, external clouds, but really it all comes down to making sure that end users get the right service that they need to do their jobs appropriately. As far as the users are concerned, they don't really care where that comes from, whether it's from big servers back in the office, back in the data center, whether it's from local machines next to them. But we have seen a lot of trends in the last year, 2, 3 years, where people have been consolidating more and more things centrally, so that there's a lot more communication happening remotely to where the users are actually sitting. But it really does then matter about making sure that they get the service level that they need, but perhaps even more importantly, the service level that they expect. You know, what do they need to do their job? Are they getting it at the right level? And making sure that they don't really care about what's sitting behind all that. They don't worry about that. All they want to do is do the job, get on with it, not have to worry about any of the technology that's in there. So it is really all about service delivery, making sure that people can work in the way that best suits the business, and also that they're comfortable and happy with.
At some point in the future, do you think we'll actually stop talking about the cloud?
I think that point is probably not too far away.
Oh, please, can it be?
It will really come down to people just working and making sure that the job of the IT guys is to make sure that they do get what they need. And how that's actually delivered from behind doesn't matter. It's all about making sure that the business can work effectively.
It's a nice idea, Mark, but it's harder than it seems.
Absolutely.
Yes, well, anything that's really adds the most value is probably difficult to achieve, isn't it? It goes without saying. A lot of the services and a lot of the delivery that IT is bringing to organisations today is of high quality and is of great for the organisations. But what organisations are also looking for is to be able to adapt and to be flexible with the demands of the business. But I'm not sure how often the business and the IT department get together and discuss those forecasts or what they think they might need. And actually, for that matter, how often the business really knows what the business is going to need in terms of forecasting flexibility. So this word, the cloud, as we're using today, but whatever that means in the future, we're certainly looking at internet-type services that are flexible and elastic, that can scale up and scale down as well. And that's what we're looking to achieve and what we're looking to bring to organisations today.
It's a really important point that Mark brought out there as well about the business not always knowing in advance what it needs. It still tends to react quite often. Sure, there are some things that you can predict and push forward, but a lot of things just happen that you need to respond to quickly. And that's one of the things that IT has been trying to adapt its own internal infrastructure and the use of external services to help meet those needs.
So one thing that we've done really early on is this thing that I hate, is sort of sticking everything into a big sort of category and lumping it all together into that. So I know our next slide, Tony, that will that sort of sorts out exactly some of the things that we're talking about.
Yep. And in essence, it's all wrapped around that term cloud. What is the cloud? We know that it's a whole bunch of different things. The terminology has been used almost indiscriminately. We have had a lot of people starting off talking about the cloud as being purely an external bunch of resources that you pull in when you need them. Again, looking at that very variable, flexible type capabilities that are in there, which is great. But also it applies internally more and more, particularly over the last year, as people have more virtualized their infrastructure. No one's, or very few people have managed to virtualize everything internally. So we've gone through a whole raft of consolidations to get an internal private cloud, as we're using the term here. But again, most of that's still relatively static. Getting that variability and flexibility in there is a great thing going forward, but not many people have started to use that yet. But then there are some of these other cases that have been around for much longer, things like software as a service. And when we talk about that, people know exactly what you mean. When we say cloud, well, which bit of the cloud, which particular interpretation is in there? And I think that's been a major problem that people have been trying to struggle with over the last couple of years, just trying to work out exactly what people are talking about.
I mean, looking at early results on our survey here, because our first question was asking people, do they have plans to move to a sort of a public cloud? And actually, from our audience today, they're pretty enthusiastic about it. So, the biggest category is in the middle. They're actively investigating it. Mm-hmm. But there's probably, if you add together the stats from the top two, we're doing this for some select and all our core business already there, then you add those together and you're getting up to almost 50%. Yep. Already. So, it is something that people... I suppose we've got a self-selecting audience here.
Absolutely. It's something, again, that reflects some of the other questions we've asked the register audience over the course of the last couple of years. People are interested. They're not quite sure what fits where. But the interest is growing, and people are progressively using more and more elements. But as you say, the majority are actually actively looking at what can we do, what should we do, what are the benefits of doing things, what should we absolutely not do now. But that, again, is going to vary over time. It might be that you move some things out today, but tomorrow you bring them back in because you're doing more of it and it's become more stable, so you don't need so much variability. This is always going to be a dynamic area. When IT gets to deliver service that the business needs, implicitly it means that things are going to change. They always have changed, but the speed on which they change now is going to become ever more rapid.
Over-enthusiasm's a problem, Mark, at this sort of level, this point in the cycle, isn't it? Are we being hopelessly optimistic?
Not necessarily, no. I think if we just take one of the notions that Tony just looked at just now, take out the word cloud, we have probably three core areas we could look at. We've got infrastructure as a service, and you could look at Amazon or anybody who's delivering some sort of infrastructure as a service, as a provider to people. On top of that, you might look at platform as a service. And that could be things like Google, or maybe it could be areas of Microsoft that are delivering a platform as a service. And maybe we could even look, as Tony mentioned, software as a service, things like Salesforce.com. So if we take each of those components, those can be, in the way they're delivered, be classed as cloud-type services. And when people realise that cloud isn't just everything that's going to solve all your problems, from whatever it is that you have in your data centre to what you need to tomorrow, and just start to break it down into some real deliverables, we realise it's not just over enthusiasm, but actually things that are being delivered today and things people are seeing. Now, the real then question as we start to evolve the whole cloud discussion is whether we're talking infrastructure, platform or software. If we combine those, are we going to build that in-house and call that our private cloud? So we're delivering the services to people wherever they are, regardless of location, as Tony mentioned earlier. People have got used to now working remotely. And then the huge question going forward, and really, I think if we start to refine the hype, what people are most questioning at the moment is what is the public cloud going to look like? Because that's the move tomorrow. What is it we're going to be getting from public service providers? And what technology is really out there that is actually going to deliver value for my organisation? Not just marketing slides, not just a great article, but something that's really going to deliver something for me today. I think that's what most people are looking for.
It's like election night here, actually. Results coming in all the time. It's terrifically exciting for me. I hope it's exciting for you. When we're looking at what people think of as the public cloud, what our audience thinks of as the public cloud at the moment, it's dominated by Amazon, 40%. Mm-hmm. Are associating that with Amazon. But and the next one, Salesforce.com. So I suppose Salesforce.com already has has a long-term relationships with a lot of people who are using it, even before it started to be called the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, This is all. I mean, this is all terrific. But let's move on now and just have a look at what the barriers are for this, because we never move smoothly into these new technology ideas, do we? And the same old barriers keep popping up over and over again, don't they, Tony?
Yep, indeed, the barriers that we've put here are not just barriers for the growth of cloud, public or private. They're essentially things that are always a challenge whenever there's an evolution in the IT services and the IT infrastructure and the way it's put together. And, you know, the bottom right is always a sort of subconscious thing in there, you know, being locked in with one vendor who's got me completely over the barrel. There's no way I can move easily or cheaply to doing something else. So fear of being tied down to one supplier and being unable to move, which in the cloud context is sort of contrary to what you want to do. The idea of cloud is that you can change things very quickly. But does that mean that I can only change within my one cloud supplier, whereas I might want to move between different suppliers at different times? So that lock-in is a big challenge for the cloud supplier community as a whole, to actually come up with things there that make people more comfortable with everything. And of course, security is always in the minds of the IT guys. We know that. Sometimes it's less in the minds of the business guys. They don't always understand the implications of security. And clearly, when we're talking about cloud and potentially pushing things out beyond the data center, beyond the computer room, there are new factors that come into play there, and it's something that people need to be very aware of.
Well, legal requirements, apart from anything else.
Absolutely. That the whole idea of, well, where can you push data that belongs to your customers and has privileged information in there, perhaps without encrypting it? Where can you put it? Where can you not put it? Who can see it? How can you be sure that it's going to be well looked after there? These are matters that people obviously have to take seriously, but that applies also whether you're keeping it in-house as well. You know, you've got to be able to make sure that it's protected and locked down. Can some cloud providers do a better job of securing things than others? We've seen good results from some of them, but again, it's all a perception thing. And the last three are the sort of traditional IT areas that we've always been concerned with. You know, are the services up and running? You know, can the users actually get hold of it when they want to? Is the performance good enough? And that really is the key question, because quite a lot of the tools we've used for monitoring in the past, we can say that, yep, the service is up, but if it's running so slowly that the users are going away for 15 minutes to make a cup of coffee between hitting the return button and waiting for the results to come back, there's obviously a problem. So getting the performance right and making sure that people can get a good enough service level to meet their needs, particularly as we've done a lot of this consolidation. So now there's more people effectively working remotely from where their services are being supplied internally, as well as now potentially over very long distances externally. A big challenge is, and the idea of doing a lot of process, perhaps in a public cloud or in your own data center, is involving moving ever more volumes of information around. And so that bottleneck over actually getting the data to where it's needed to be accessed for someone to actually run their analysis on there or to run the transactions is a growing problem that I think is only just becoming visible to many people.
I guess, Mark, no one's going to thank you for moving applications over to the public cloud if the service degrades at the end of it.
Absolutely. It's like many things. Change always brings about concern. And these we're looking at here are what we've seen just through analysis and talking and discussing the top 5. There may be people listening today that are tuned in that may have some other concerns. But any time you bring change about, any time you want to do things different, this isn't just a bells and whistles, extra feature or function onto existing IT. This is a genuine change in process, internal processes, organisational processes, potentially within the IT department, and the way businesses could potentially do businesses and start to grow and open offices. So, yeah, there's going to be a number of things that people are going to be concerned about, and quite rightly so, and quite naturally so. And of course, what we have to do as the market people and vendors is look at addressing those issues, because if we don't overcome those barriers, then there is the potential that people will not move or not make the move. So these are things we take seriously, and as you quite rightly say, one of the key areas is performance, because it's all very well overcoming security issues, overcoming the availability, the flexibility of the business. But if now my users have to wait a bit longer and it becomes very frustrating, you do what we've seen in the past. You start to force people to go underground. They start to buy their own applications, they'll buy their own servers, they'll do their own thing, and then you've got a right mess to pick up and try and sort out.
And they'll hate you even more after they've done that as well, won't they?
Yes, which is very difficult, but quite possible, I suppose.
By even more. I don't mean they hate you already. I don't know anything about this. if these are your problems, or if they, if they're not your problems, and you've got other squares that we sort of put on this, do let us know. We're working you quite hard today, but it's good for you. But yeah, so we do have a whole list of problems here, but this is an interesting slide for me, Tony, because it seems that there's a whole bunch of people that it's not putting off.
Absolutely, and this, when we asked the register audience about it, and we actually did some genuine analysis of the answers that come back to try and get this answer out there.
I thought you just made up these charts.
Well, that's...
There's just so many of them.
We've got some really clever people in the back office that crunch the numbers, but we actually found a pattern here that, as you say, is perhaps counterintuitive, in as much as everyone thinks that cloud computing isn't real, and that there's a lot of hype around it. But when we looked at this chart, we thought, this is interesting. We asked people about how much they use cloud computing, but also how IT was perceived within their business. And in particular, whether it was a critical component and the business really couldn't work without it, or it's important, or essentially it's just one of those things that we have to have, but we're not really that keen on it. It's something we've got to do. It's a cost rather than a real benefit. And when we analyse things here, you can see that the number of people using cloud computing was much higher amongst organisations that really did see IT as being a core part of the way they do business and delivered their services out to their end users.
You see, I would have thought it would be completely the other way around.
Yep.
That the people who didn't care much about IT would want to shunt it out to someone else and just pay them to take care of it.
Yeah, but again, I think this is really a reflection of that idea that we talked about at the beginning, of making sure that the users have got the services they need in the way that they need to do it, and that it's IT's job just to make sure that they've got what they need, and for IT to find the most appropriate way of delivering it. And this isn't saying that these people are just doing cloud computing and nothing internally. It's saying that they've sat back, worked out, well, what does it make sense to push out? What does it not make sense to push out? And they've then acted accordingly.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's questions coming in. We've got lots of questions coming in from people saying that when they're using the cloud, network availability is the problem. And so it's a good job we've got you here, actually, because you're Mr. Network Availability, and being, and so later on we're going to get to how we solve some of these problems.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Good, excellent. So before we get to that, then Tony, the other thing is looking at management. This is one of your depressing slides. You always stick one in.
Well, it's not a depressing slide. It's more a reflection of the way things really are. We've asked people, are you happy with the tools that you have out there to support your storage systems, to support the performance side, the things we've just been talking about? Because we know, and I was a real IT guy in the past, like the folks out there watching us today, and the one thing that is going to get people ringing in and complaining is when things are running slowly. And that's a given. It's an absolute. It never changes. But interestingly, we can see here that of all the tools that we're using to monitor and manage systems, the one that we're least happy with is performance management. And the whole idea of managing storage, well, we know that that's a challenge for everybody. It's something that's growing in importance as people become more visible of just how much data they've got out there. But the performance side is interesting because it's so close to the heart of what IT does, and it generates so many problems with end users when it isn't running well. But still, we're happiest, least of all, with the tools we've got to actually make sure that we're delivering good performance.
Does this mean, Mark, we're storing up a problem then if we start to shunt this stuff out of the business into the public cloud? Or, as I see that it's the majority of people are looking at this sort of short-term tactical, putting stuff out to the cloud when they need just some extra capability, but you haven't got the management right.
Yeah, so there's a number of kind of issues that we could touch upon here, because it's the whole area of management and what's going on with your network today is so important to understand, because before you can do anything, I've already mentioned this is about change, before you can make any changes, you need to know, where am I here? Where am I today? What am I doing now? What does my systems look like? How is it architected? How is it deployed? And how is it being used? Now, they might seem obvious questions, but as most IT managers will know, the answers to those are not necessarily that obvious. So you really need to have a good, firm grip on what the IT organisation, what's happening today. Now, there are many tools out there today, which from Riverbed, there's products like Cascade, and I don't think there's anybody around today who doesn't want to know what's on their network at some point in time. So if you're building for the cloud, understanding what's here today is really important. And I think that plays well to the earlier point when we talked about people who are looking, to transition. We've got more of the large IT organisations actually adopting it than some of the smaller organisations. And perhaps a key reason for that is because this is change. It's a transitional thing. It's not like we can start up a business tomorrow and from a greenfield site we can go straight to cloud. People are having to take what they have today and move it across. So even though the promise of cloud computing may be simplicity, to get there is complicated. And so what we have at the moment are early adopters, people who can invest time and effort and energy in transitioning to that new phase of cloud computing. As we start to get experience, as we start to get better at that, a bit like we did with the internet 10 years ago. The internet was a modem, you had to know a few command lines to get the thing running. Probably the people who remember T-Rex will probably remember this. And you had to know a bit more about how to get computers working before you could actually get on the internet. Today, you can set up a business in literally hours on the internet without too much work. And I think what we will see are smaller businesses taking big advantage of what's going to happen within the cloud, because it's all of the early adopters will have paved the way for some of the laggards, which sounds negative, but it's not. Some people actually are better to just leave things a bit later, and we'll then see some of the smaller organisations starting up a business and then going straight to cloud computing. But we are going through that phase of just the early adopters, just the pioneers, that's the word I was looking for.
Pioneers.
Yes.
Pioneers. Pioneers sound so much more inspiring than early adopters as well, which is kind of like technocratic, isn't it?
Yes.
Actually, for our question 3, which is what people believe the key advantages are, it sort of roughly agrees with the analysis so far, because the bottom 2 on what the key advantages of cloud computing are security and availability. Security right at the bottom, sort of 7%, and availability about 10%. And the top 2, flexibility second, but cost of ownership is the one. So there is a sort of like a shunting the mess out the door for and having to pay less for it attitude to it. I'm interpreting here. Is maybe that little bit irresponsible, perhaps?
It's what helps drive the business. When we're driving business, there are barriers to maybe doing that. But first of all, you've got to see, is there cost benefits to this? Can we actually get a return? Is this really going to deliver value for the business? If it isn't, then maybe it's not worth looking further. But if it potentially is, and there are huge cost savings, then we start to look at some of the barriers.
And it's particularly important for some of those variable workloads. If we know that we only need to run this, for 3 weeks, 2 hours, whatever, then the cost of ownership can be really compelling to just move it out, do it, and it's done. It's gone. We don't need to get a whole infrastructure just to run that stuff for 2 weeks. Whereas if we're going to be pushing it out there and running it, continuously for the next 36 months, maybe the cost of ownership then is more balanced towards doing it internally. But again, it's getting back to something that Mark raised there. It's about knowing what you've got, knowing how long it's going to be running, who's using it, what are the factors wrapped around, things like security and performance that we actually need to deliver. And we know from other studies we've done with the register audience that that's not always clear, that people don't have a really good grasp on exactly what's going on, who's using it. Can we push this out? Will it be running for very long? Quite often, even the business doesn't know how long they're going to be running something for. There are some things that are brought in allegedly just for a month, 2 months to get over a hump, and they're still there chugging away in the background 5 years later.
Yeah.
So making some of these decisions is going to be hard, but that's why that not getting locked in is really important. So you can push it out, but also can you bring it back and run it internally when you want to? And there are tools that help you do that.
Well, let's move it on, because I want to get to specifically how we how we move to guaranteeing these service levels and everything. So this is the last of your charts.
Yeah, this is the last of the stats charts.
Yeah.
Again, it's from the register audience, and the left-hand side there is about what are the things having the biggest impact on how you run your server environments. And when server guys start telling you that it's the growth in data, you know that one of the things that the Mark's going to be talking about, actually moving data around, is really important.
Yeah.
We could say that probably only in the last 2 or 3 years has the whole cost and scale of the storage problem, the data management problem, really begun to impact on people's consciousness. You know, it's always been something that's been part of something else. But now we're recognising that looking after information and moving potentially information around to either cheaper stores, more secure stores, faster stores, is something that's going to grow in importance because there's just so much data that people are generating. And okay, a lot of it's rubbish, but there's a lot of really important stuff in there, and actually looking after that, moving it to where it's most cost effective to keep it, where it's best secured. These are things that are going to become more and more important going forward. They're not going to diminish because we are just generating so much information. And actually companies now really want to actually get in there and analyse it to get business advantage out of the data they've got. They've got so much, they know that there's got to be gems in there that they can exploit and get value from their customers from, and that their customers can get benefit from them using better too.
And so briefly, Mark, is it the problem that we've rather undervalued the contribution that data management makes to the efficient run-in of the IT department?
I think storage people would never undervalue it. They certainly recognise it, and see it.
But we've ignored the storage people.
But there are very few storage people anyway. It's only the really big companies that have got storage people.
Now, I've always been a firm believer that I think behind your customers and the people in an organisation, your intellectual property or your storage is probably your third most important asset, certainly the information on that storage. So it really is of paramount importance to an organisation, because if you lose all that information, you know, you can lose customers, that would be disaster, you can lose people, that would be disaster, but you lose the information and the business really does have trouble succeeding, so it's of paramount importance.
I know you're going to get into that a little bit later about how we actually manage that in the cloud. So
But that's why the security question there is also really important, because, you know, you can lose data not just by, you know, physically losing it, but by people getting access to it and it becoming public knowledge. And in terms of brand credibility, that can have a big impact.
Yeah. Now, so Mark, you tell us a little bit about, because you're tell us a little bit about Riverbed for people who don't deal with you. So to put into context exactly why we're going to talk about how we can fix that, why you're here, basically.
So I think if you looked at one of the earlier slides, and what I'll do is I'll just jump back, if I can, onto the one that talked about the barriers to success. We look at performance and bottlenecks. Traditionally, Riverbed has worked in the WAN optimisation market alongside other vendors. And primarily, our role is to enable the wide area network to perform like a local area network. And so if you imagine the possibilities of enabling your WAN to perform like a LAN, you can start to do exciting things like consolidate your infrastructure to the data centre. If you've consolidated to the data centre, you may want to have data centre to data centre, back up high volumes of data, large amounts of information. So we can help optimise that as well. So it takes less time to back up and, more importantly, less time to recover, so it keeps the business running. And in terms of remote offices, you can actually remove remote infrastructure from those offices, so keeping costs down and enabling people to manage everything centrally. So predominantly that's what WAN optimization brings to the market today, and that's the core of what Riverbed has been delivering for many years now.
And one thing there that Mark hasn't talked about, it's not just big companies that this might be interesting for. You know, lots of small companies don't have 2 data centres that they're running. They might only have 1 computer room. Potentially there's the chance now to actually move that out maybe to a cloud provider so that they can keep your reserve copy for when you need to recover from it. So that you've got dual site, you know, you've got multiple instances of your data being protected, and you don't have to just put it onto a tape and maybe stick it in the bank vault, where of course if something happens at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, you may not be able to get it until 9 o'clock Monday morning.
Mm-hmm. But is it as simple as just when you move it out to the cloud provider, is it as simple as just, I don't know, plugging in something to a new socket?
Yes, with anything between 6 to 9 months' work beforehand.
Yeah.
Preparing. Yes, it is something which you can do, but there are some barriers to overcome which we can move on to. And I think one of the things I'd like to touch on, if that's okay, is to look at, we've mentioned about software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, but can I really move it out to the provider? I think is kind of what you're asking me. These things that can happen. Well, you know, if people look at the slide that I'm showing now, there are a number of very large brand organisations, very well-known organisations that I'm sure everybody has heard of, that are delivering a range of services that offer both applications in the cloud and storage in the cloud. And we've kind of touched on both of those, but I want to carefully distinguish between the two, because the way that you manage applications in the cloud is going to be very different from the way that you will manage storage in the cloud. And many of these providers deal with one area, and many providers deal with the other area. and some of them deal with both. But obviously that's just a kind of consideration.
But we have to think about them in a different way.
Absolutely. The way they're addressed, the way they're looked at, the problems, the issues that rise from them are very different, absolutely, and we'll come on to that.
And it's not just the big guys that are doing this as well. There's also a lot of smaller local providers that are running essentially, hosted services that, in all intents and purposes, are cloud, either on the application side, and because you're running your email system with them, and they've been doing it for years. So it's not just the big guys that are doing this. And again, it's down to your definitions. What is cloud? What isn't? Lots of it being used. Are they growing? Yes. They're growing from small bases. Some of them certainly are, but they are growing. All of the stats say that.
OK, now, Mark, take me through WAN optimization in the cloud. Why is it different?
OK, so good question, and hopefully I have just as good an answer.
Well, I hope so. There's really no point in having you here.
Absolutely, yes. So what we have, as we talked about just now, and I kind of quickly referred to the slide that you have in front of the people who are looking now. On the left, we have Office users, and typically they will be there with some form of a WAN optimization device. In this example, it's mentioned as Stillhead, but there are a range of providers there. On the data center side, you have another Stillhead. So what we're able to do between those two sites is the office could be in New York and the data center could be in London. But the way that they'll interoperate and share information is as though they're in the same building. Now, the whole promise of cloud is that the cloud resides somewhere that you don't know. And it could be in your country, it could be potentially in a different country, obviously data protection laws, etc. allowing. So in this example, what we see here is the ability to run an application in the cloud. And this is very specifically talking about applications. I distinguish between the two. And the Stillhead, the cloud Stillhead, one might naturally assume, OK, well, why don't I just plug a WAN optimization device into the cloud, give that to the provider, and then I get the same service that I am today? Yeah. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Why? Well, there are many reasons, but some of the key pertinent points are, for example, the cloud provider doesn't necessarily reside the application that you've purchased for them in the same server, in the same location all of the time. They may want to fail over in the event of a failover. They may want to move to a different site in the event of maintenance. You don't know about this. You don't care about this. But you would know about it if they took it away from the Stillhead.
So you can't just park a device next to it because it might not be there tomorrow.
Absolutely. And what you're actually filled with is you've got racks and racks and racks of servers with lots of virtualization software and lots of clever portal software that enables you to get access to that. So in essence, what we do is we've got here, in this example, a cloud Stillhead, which is something from Riverbed. There are obviously vendors who are looking to bring other things to the market here. But the idea is principally that you go to your cloud provider, and I'll use a specific example because we're working with these, Amazon, for example, and you log in to your cloud provider and you want to add a Stillhead or a WAN optimizer to your provider. What you simply do is click on a web link that we provide. You enter your username and password that's associated with your cloud provider, in this case Amazon, and then automatically it understands the nodes, the configuration, how it's architectured, a lot of the background stuff that you might think about, and then you simply decide how long you want to subscribe to the service for and how many users you want to be able to access the service, and then you press the go button, and then the software is inextricably, it's easy to say, linked in with the service that Amazon is providing, and that therefore wherever they move that service through failover, through scaling up, through scaling down, it will be attached and link in with that.
So your optimization travels around as the application, wherever the application is.
Absolutely.
And the optimization that you're getting is what?
It is the same optimization that everyone knows and loves from what would traditionally be a WAN optimization device. So in the case of Stillhead, we reduce the traffic, we optimize TCP, and we accelerate the application. So as far as that's concerned, this is not brand new. This is technology we've been running for many years now, but what is new is the way that the agents actually find and auto-discover so that it has the flexibility to move around, and that's where the real hard work and effort has gone. It's not just another Stillhead, it's not just a virtualized software version of a WAN optimization device. We do have that as well in a virtual Stillhead. This is actually very specifically written in conjunction with the cloud service provider. Now, I've mentioned Amazon. There are others that we're working with, and there will be more coming down line to actually address those.
And as a user, I have to have your hardware in my organisation as well, at the other end?
Absolutely. So it's a two-ended device, and you would typically have an infrastructure already in place, and whether you're sitting in a data centre, sitting in a branch office, or even on a laptop, be it an Apple or a PC, at some remote place using your 3G networking card from the service provider, you can get access to that cloud service as though you were in the same building because of the way it optimises.
It's a question you raised. There's just a quick question. Why do these have to be physical devices? Why not just virtualise them?
So in the cloud, specifically, that needs to be a virtual device, and it's a software device which actually links in with the cloud provider. What we offer to people in their branch offices and data centre are then two other elements. You can either have a software that sits on your laptop. It could be an appliance, which is traditionally what most people actually use, but we also have something called a virtual stillhead. So now the infrastructure is becoming virtual. So if an organisation has some very difficult to get to places, maybe you have a battle tank, maybe you've got some remote news vehicle, maybe you've got an oil rig, where you just want the software and you want to run it on your own server under a virtual machine, then we allow for that as well.
It's another example of flexibility. You know, people want to have the capabilities, but the way they actually deliver them will differ depending upon their own explicit requirements and also, to a degree, their own preferences. Some people like physical appliances, other people like virtual appliances. It's a choice.
Is it unwise to go to the cloud without this kind of optimisation, Tony?
Depends really on what your service requirements are. If you're happy with some variable performance, because the internet is naturally variable, then fine. If you really want to optimise things, and there will be some applications, some data that you really do want to optimise because they are, as you push more and more business important things out there, it becomes more important to do that. But certainly when you're running things internally between different offices, your own internal cloud, then making sure that users have good performance there, as we talked about earlier, is really important because it's the thing they complain about most. And when you have consolidated, you've got lots of benefits in terms of cost of the servers, cost of the power, all of these things. But if the users really don't like the performance they're getting, then that can have some repercussions for you, as I'm sure everybody out there knows. So making sure that if you've got things that need better performance than they're receiving today, it's something that you should look at. I think the whole WAN optimization area isn't as understood by the wider IT community. There are certainly networking specialists who get it, but the number of networking specialists in many companies is quite small as well. So it's something I think that its time is coming as we become ever more dependent on comms, and you can almost see that the WAN optimization, one of those things that starts off as a niche requirement today, but over time I suspect it's going to become just the way things are done.
Final question on this one, Mark.
Yep.
It's what, even with these devices in, what's the constraint on optimization, the constraint on the service level you're going to get?
None. It's all upside.
Yep.
In terms of constraint, do you mean bandwidth?
Well, I mean, basically, so, for example, if I'm still worried that my latency is too high, then, then what can I do? It's like a volume knob. Turn it up to 10, you can't turn it up to 11.
So the truth is, the worse the latency, the minimal the bandwidth, the bigger the advantage, the bigger the performance improvement will be. So we actually find people who, have those issues have the biggest advantage over this. But one thing that I will add, because it's a question you pointed to just now, which is, is this right? Does everybody need this? And some people might be out there thinking, look, I've been using Google Mail for years, and actually the performance on that is fine. And do you know what? They're right. If you're using the likes of Google Mail and it's online, simple emails aren't a big issue. And if sending that email and time-wise doesn't matter, it's not a big issue. It really comes an issue where in business you need to send large files or large documents, and then you start to transact and move documents around. Maybe you're editing architectural files or you're editing legal files and documents. Then when we start to see those moves, that's when it becomes relevant. But there are dips of toes in the water today for some services that are working adequately. But we're a very bandwidth-hungry people in terms of media, documents, files, and video, and those kind of things. And that's where this really helps.
And if you do have an application that is so latency sensitive that it won't run even with the best WAN optimization, then you have no choice but to find a different approach to actually delivering that service. And there are things like that, some of the real financial services stuff that happen in milliseconds or even quicker, really getting that latency down as tight as possible. Then you might not want to run that over a very long wide area network. But the guys who are running those systems know that. But the interesting thing is that it's really about knowing, well, what services are you delivering to whom, what are their requirements, and how do you know you're meeting them?
Yeah.
And that's really the heart of it.
One thing I'd like to add, actually, because it's come to light working in this market, I get to see quite a lot and learn a lot. There are other options out there, and, it's no surprise. And those options are kind of an all. That is, let's move everything to the cloud today. And so there's flexibility in who they can support, but everything moves into the cloud at once. I don't think many organisations are actually ready to move everything in. I think it would be a hybrid, a stepped approach. As I mentioned the word transition, I meant that in transitional, in many levels, as to how you move a service across and how you may move services across. And so we talked earlier about private cloud and we talked about public cloud. I think what we'll have for many years still is a hybrid of both of those. So in the private cloud, we'll have the WAN optimization from the devices such as Steelhead, and then in the public cloud we'll have WAN optimization from devices and certainly for applications, things like Cloud Steelhead. So we've got the ability here to have the transition.
Yeah, I mean, even from our audience today, there's less than a quarter that have put all their core systems.
Absolutely, and
I don't think that we're ever going to be in a position where many people are going to put all of the core systems out there. I think that it is going to be variable, but what you consider core today will change.
Okay, but let's keep on the. Let's look a little bit more detail about how you, how you solve some of these problems.
Yep.
Someone's asked about other vendors that you work with. You're going to get to that at the end, aren't you?
I can talk about that now.
What's the question? Microsoft Azure.
Microsoft?
Yeah.
So Microsoft is a company that we've been working with at a number of levels for a while now, with many different software areas. BPOS is something which people look at, which I think has been renamed recently, so I should use the correct term, to 365. And, those are areas and good examples of what we're actually dealing with. Other vendors, people like, we mentioned it on the slide earlier, EMC. So they have an Atmos service, which is their storage for the cloud environment. And we've been working with those guys. Now, they don't actually deliver cloud services. They're a vendor. But behind them are, we saw AT&T Synaptics earlier, which was mentioned, which is built on EMC. We also have, and it's not on these slides, but it plays to a point Tony mentioned. We talk about the big players and the big brands, but what about the small players? And I've talked about the IT department evolving and changing. The way the market's going to sell these services is changing. So two smaller companies, I'm sure won't mind me mentioning their names, Redstore and MTI, that are known for very different reasons, are actually both today are looking to deliver storage services. And it has been publicly announced on the EMC website, and that's based on EMC Atmos. So these are the kind of small partners to very large branded partners, but they're all going to be offering something unique in terms of the way and what they can deliver. So, so there's a number of vendors that we're working with out there.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about storage now.
Yeah.
We'll move this on, because you said storage is different.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know exactly how it is different.
Okay. So with applications in the cloud, you just need to get access to an application, and it might be a screen refresh, it might be a button, it might do some various other things. I almost sound like I know what I'm talking about with applications. I'm not a software expert, but it's minimal what actually gets presented on the screen and the way you interact with that. When it comes to storage, we're talking megabytes, gigabytes, potentially even terabytes of information. So an application downloading to my laptop is not likely to take up hundreds of gigabytes that I'm going to be constantly updating and adding and growing. So the very nature of the way it works is very different. So what we have is, at its simplest level, take out any optimization, just what cloud storage does. Today you have and we've already talked about the life cycle of storage. So you'd have your tier 1 storage, transactional, really fast, that you need to get access to. Maybe you have tier 2, less important, but nonetheless you want to get access to it. Maybe you've got some form of archiving. Maybe you've got some form of backup. And these different ways of managing storage are important to every organisation. Backup is pretty important, almost as important as recovery after you've actually backed something up. And so the options people have today are, we've mentioned tapes. So let me back everything up locally, put it on a tape and ship it off somewhere and archive it. Well, that's kind of costly, it's expensive. We hear of many cases of tapes getting lost in the post. And it's also very time-consuming to recover. So another great option that vendors offer is secondary storage device. So using IP, you can back up to that. And that's pretty good too, because you can back up over the network. And if you use WAN optimization, like Steelhead, then it can help you optimize that. But we've just been talking about cloud today, so I guess I should bring that into the discussion.
I was hoping you would.
What happens if I want to back up to the cloud and move things to the cloud? Do I physically put a device out there? Well, again, we've got the problems. We don't know where it's going to be, how it's going to operate, how it's going to work. And then I've got other things like security and performance and bottlenecks, and I've already mentioned what's the recovery going to look like. So it's very different in the way it works from the way it happens with applications. Now, if anybody's been looking at the slide wondering what this actually is representing here, I haven't really touched on this too much, but we're just showing simply you can have your cloud storage service provider. So this could be, as we've mentioned already, I'll just summarise some of the people we've talked about, AT&T Synaptics, it could be Amazon, it could be MTI or Red Store. So very large and very smaller brands that are known in the market. How do we get access to that? How do we ensure that it's secure, and how do we make sure that not only the backup, because actually, if I'm honest, and I think most people listening to this, the backup time isn't so important to them, it's the recovery that's important. What we can do with this is we have something called a whitewater device, which is a specific device that helps people with the cloud. And it delivers a few principal values. First of all of those providers that I've just mentioned possibly have different APIs, different ways of writing to the cloud. So you need to rewrite your applications to do that. Whitewater takes care of that. It simply works, and we have software engineers that are developing it so that it works with many different cloud storage providers. Secondly, in the same way that Steelhead does the optimization of the bandwidth, that's what this does. It takes out duplication of data, so it deduplicates data and replaces it with references, so that all you store in the cloud are the references and the net new data. And what that means is that not only can you back up much faster and recover much quicker, but you need less storage. So instead of buying 20 terabytes, you only need 10 terabytes or 5 terabytes or 2 terabytes, depending on your ratio of dehydration, as kind of somebody used the other day, which is quite a nice term of taking out all the unnecessary stuff, just get it down to the core components and then exploding it again. So this is really something that's enabling people to get access, recover quickly, overcoming the barriers of writing application programmable interfaces into the cloud, and enabling you to use much less storage. And the last thing, because I've just been reminded by looking at the bullet point here, is the security aspect. It can encrypt data in flight, and then it can encrypt it at rest in the cloud. But the encryption code never leaves the data center, of course.
So, but you don't need something at the other end. The cloud
well spotted, absolutely. Yeah. This is a single-ended device approach. So unlike the Steelhead where you need one at each end to hub and spoke, this is a single device that you would have at your customer premises, and then you would, absolutely not need.
The cloud storage provider really doesn't care what you're storing.
No, it doesn't matter what you're storing, and because we're only loading references and net new data, it means that the actual data transmitted is much less than the actual data that you would recover from that. And the other thing it offers is the local device actually adds, and this is a word that never gets used at Riverbed until now, it does act as a cache, because you can store some of that information locally. We have 2, 4, 8 terabyte machines that store an element of local information. But obviously once you go above that, it just goes to the cloud storage. So the most recently used archived information. And what you've done away with here is, and who we're competing with at some level actually, your courier company, because instead of you shipping the tapes off-site, you don't need to do that. And of course, the costly exercise of having secondary storage and the time to recover is also overcome with this. So you have elasticity and time as well on your side.
Yep. And it's really important. Mark said that people are less concerned about their backup windows to a degree. The point is, though, that people should really be concerned about the recovery time, because that's the important bit, getting the data back. And we know that few people get the chance to actually test their ability to recover anyway. But anything that can make that faster, easier, is certainly welcome. The other really interesting point about this is the whole encryption side as well, because everybody knows that data is sensitive. It needs to be protected. We talked about security earlier. We know from a poll that we ran with the registered audience earlier in the year that there are many areas where they think data should be encrypted, and it's many more areas than they are currently encrypting things. And that certainly applies if you're thinking about moving any data off-site. Do you really want even your backup tapes being stored not encrypted? In the past, that may have been acceptable. Today, probably much less so, and with the external requirements in terms of legislation and governance and regulation forcing ever more protection to be applied to sensitive data, and indeed what's actually classified as sensitive data growing almost daily to include nearly everything now, the need for encryption is going to increase, not just in this context, but across the board.
Practical encryption as well.
And things that you can do easily. And if you're moving it off-site, we talked about some of the geographical restrictions on where you can move data. There are some countries where they actually say, well, if it's encrypted to a certain degree, then frankly, even if you have moved it beyond where we say you can move it, that doesn't matter, because as long as the keys stay here and no one's got access to them, then to all intents and purposes, you haven't moved anything sensitive out there, because it's unreadable without the keys.
It's one of our questions in from Martin, who was saying that this is a big problem for him. He works with data across 4 continents, and he just cannot seem to get a sort of a straight answer that will help him to work out where he shifts his data to and how he stores it.
Well, lawyers are very skilled at not giving straight answers.
I suppose
and they're the ones with most to gain from all of this.
That's their business. But I suppose this goes some of the way in some places to helping with that. But it's not necessarily a legal solution to everything, though, is it? This is about security. It's not about legality.
No, it's about process as well. There are some things that just from a business branding point of view, if you lose data and you're even a small company, if you're a big company and you lose data, then you get a lot of bad publicity. If you're a small company and lose data, then potentially you might go out of business. Particularly if it's been lost, or not so much lost as stolen, or someone else has acquired it. Now, a lot of the cloud companies are really good at securing their systems anyway, so that other people can't get in there. But just having that comfort and being able to tell your customers that, look, this is all locked up and it's locked away, so that even if someone gets in, physically breaks into the data center of our cloud provider and pulls out the disks, well, they can look at it, but unless they've got some huge supercomputers and all the time in the world to actually try and decrypt this at random, doesn't matter. We've got the data covered.
Now, for looking at this, does this mean, Mark, that in future, because we'll all be using the cloud for something or other, I guess, and we'll stop thinking about it as being the cloud, there's just going to be a couple of extra things in the rack there. There's going to be something for, optimising getting your data backwards and forwards, something for optimising getting your applications backwards and forwards. Well, I mean, I suppose that would be ideal for you, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I think every branch office should just have steelheads, and that would be fun.
OK. We're not actually underwriting that particular claim. Yeah. Other devices are.
But the important thing here is you're right, there is change evolving, and we keep using this word, but it is in the way that the branch offices are architected, the way they're designed. What they deploy at the branch office is getting less. They want to manage more centrally. And once they've managed it centrally, they want to have that elasticity and that flexibility for something which I heard recently termed as cloud bursting, was a term that was used, which is, and it may be a new one to you as well, but it's the ability that you might not actually just buy storage or buy applications for use, but there may be peak performance or peak times in a quarter for some organisations, or in a year, where they just need that extra storage, that extra processing power, and they just want to just buy into that for a temporary moment. And so, yeah, there will be some change in the way things that people architect that.
Okay, so
and that peak area is one area that we know that the register audience are more interested in, because it's short term, so therefore it's relatively cost effective to push it out rather than have to build the extra infrastructure that just lays idle for the rest of the time internally. That's one of the areas that has been identified as being, one, a genuine use of the term cloud, but also an area that people are actually interested in looking at.
Well, let's look at a couple of the questions in the time we've got left. Terry's talking about that this is a problem that comes up over and over again. He said his frustration is he cannot get an SLA a really meaningful SLA from a public cloud provider at the moment. It's a problem that you can't get past, is it?
It's not. Yeah. So, in the organisation that we are, and behaving the way we do, we have the technologies that enable them to improve SLAs. That's the service providers, and we work very closely with them. Obviously, we don't underwrite or work, but I can say that this technology has enabled service providers, and I don't have any specific examples now, but there is a very large telco in the UK that many people will have heard of that have used this to help them underwrite and improve the SLAs that they're able to deliver as a result of this technology. So whereas previously they were kind of working to SLAs and struggling to work to those, we gave them comfort zone and then gave them the ability to improve those drastically. But obviously, what I can't do, is in any way underwrite or state that we will guarantee that, because that's not where we are.
Can you give me typical sorts of performance improvements then?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. As we've just been talking about the Whitewater cloud storage device, and I'll move on to some of that. People are looking at this probably thinking, oh, that looks interesting. But We had an example recently in demonstration that we used with a customer where they had a 5 gigabyte file that they wanted to back up. And with the particular lease line and latency that they had, and forgive me for not knowing those, but they weren't anything drastically poor, but typically what you might find, it took them something like 9 hours to back up this 5 gigabyte file. With the Whitewater, that backup and recovery, I should say, the recovery came down to 10 minutes. So we're talking quite significant reduction in time to recover files. In fact, what we're talking about is it's no longer a window or things you need to plan around. This is a real-time, almost, ability to recover lost data.
People don't really have those windows, quite a few of them anymore.
9 hours is longer than a working day, so it's quite a difficult thing to recover.
Yes.
But the service level side is really important for the service providers. It's something they have to step up to, and they need to provide tools that not just optimise the use of the connectivity, but actually give customers something measurable against which they can be held. And that could be that they just have, here's the performance once it leaves our data centre and goes out into the big wide internet. And then you can measure the performance once it hits your internet internally. And then the bit in the middle, you can optimise it. But I think that this whole end-to-end performance side is something that customers need to demand of their service providers, because exactly as Terry said, the cloud providers are doing their best in many cases to avoid giving anything beyond perhaps, quote, an availability recommendation.
Which isn't really very useful.
Not good enough for many business services, and restricts where they are actually applicable.
Yeah. Mark, you can explain what we're seeing now on our slide.
So one of the things that Riverbed has looked to deliver, or WAN optimization devices look to deliver, is the simplicity and the way they integrate in any environment. So if we just kind of remind ourselves a bit earlier of the steelhead, it sits in the network, pretty invisible in that you don't need to reconfigure any servers, any of your applications, anything. It just sits there and it optimizes naturally. Obviously, you install them, you configure the devices, but as far as everything around it goes, they just run. And similarly with the cloud steelhead as well. Storage is obviously different, as we keep saying. And so what people will be using today are a number of vendor software. And if you look at the slide, if anyone's watching, you can see there's like Symantec, we've got IBM Tivoli, we've got EMC, and there are a number of others here, Microsoft, Computer Associates, Oracle, which we're working on and developing. So if you're used to these tools, you will simply write to Whitewater, and it's seen as a CIFS or an NFS file store. So it's as simple as actually using these tools as you do today, writing to Whitewater, and then it takes care of the program interface into the cloud. And on the right-hand side, and you had a gentleman write in asking about Windows Azure. As you can see, that's something there that we're working with, and Google, and there are some others there that you can also, some that I've mentioned, and some we're working through. If your software is not on the left, or the potential provider is not on the right, then chances are it will do. But we are looking to work and extend, and if there's anything here that people would like to see, then I would be very, for one, interested in who that might be, particularly for the UK market, which is obviously what we're talking to here today. But this is a way of seamlessly integrating it into your network on the left side, and then how you can seamlessly integrate it as part of a cloud provider on the right.
Yeah, catch Riverbed before they get big and arrogant and start to ignore you. The on this, now there's Barry's been asking. He wants some sort of clarification on us using existing Riverbed devices to work with sort of cloud providers. Now on the Steelhead side, that's still the same device inside.
Absolutely perfect. The infrastructure that you have there is designed to just work.
Just make sure that your cloud provider offers the cloud Steelhead thing, because Okay, and here's a nice one to wrap up with. It's a question for both of you. If the session's titled "How do you guarantee cloud service levels?" well, why has it got that title if you can't actually do that?
Well, we thought that was your title, Tim.
Don't blame me. I'm not guaranteeing anything to anyone. I guess it's the closest we get to a guarantee, isn't it?
Yeah, you can guarantee very few things. But actually,
death and taxes.
Understanding what you're doing is the point from which to start. Very few people know the service quality that they're delivering today in many areas, and certainly when you move into a cloud environment, then it gets really very difficult to do. So maybe guaranteeing would be the wrong term, unless you use the phrase, guaranteeing it to be as good as it can be.
I think we're guaranteeing improvement. There will be an improvement in subject to discussion and qualification. But, in the way that we deal with applications and deal with storage, you are going to see vast improvements in this. And it's going to take you from something that may be unusable, either because of the programmable interface or the performance barriers or even security elements, to something that is very usable today. So that's what we're looking forward to. And we're really looking forward to this becoming a reality, becoming something we'll see adopted more and more. And as people start to get expertise, experience, knowledge, we'll see more players in the market, more vendors in the market. We'll see the small and medium enterprise benefiting from this, as they can just outsource a lot of the infrastructure. And then the guys who are in the IT department can focus on just managing that and adding value to the business rather than just on keeping the storage disk spinning.
Okay, great. And if you're one of the service providers, we want to see better SLAs from you. Okay, now thank you very much, guys. We're out of time, so thanks to the band. Thank you, Dark Lord, for your stats.
Thank you, Tim.
Very welcome, Mark. Thank you for coming in again.
It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you very much, Tim.
Good, you can come back again. Thanks for saying that. And my name's been Tim Phillips from the Register. Get us your feedback. We do more of what you like here, and we will see you again soon for our next Regcast. Goodbye.